that if they don't get a handle on it within the next 10 years, that's what we've been hearing now. Actually, if you remember back in the early 1990s, they said we had 10 years to do it or we're doomed. Well, now it's been 15 years ago now, and of course nothing's changed. Well, the same thing is going on right now. Global warming is occurring, don't get me wrong, but it's not caused by man. We had what was called a little ice age back in the 1700s and 1800s, and during that period of time, we were able to, there's a high correlation between sunspot activity and the energy output of the sun. There were almost no solar flares, no sunspots during the early 1800s, and it got about a degree and a half colder than it is right now. It is very interesting that the solar radiation and the Earth's temperature are highly correlated. In fact, they can actually be almost on a daily coordination. We had a major solar eruption back in 1998 at the same time as we had El Nino, and we had a solar spike within a week, a temperature increase within a week of that event that peaked out within a few days, about a week or so, and this is global. This isn't just the United States or a local regional area. This was global. And the two in combination, the El Nino and a solar spike in which we had a major solar eruption that was pointed right at Earth, actually changed the Earth's temperature right away. And if you go back into the 1700s, you can actually see the correlation between the Earth's temperature and the emissions of radiant energy by the sun.
One of the ironies, I think, of our times is the fact that during the 1960s and so forth, they begin to have a dogma that the environment is being destroyed by human beings. And this was perpetrated or spread out through the media. You can't watch any nature program on chimpanzees, whales, it doesn't really matter, without coming away from the fact that human beings are a virus. We're killing planet Earth, according to this media hype that we've had ever since the 1960s. Now it's global warming. You can't hardly go through a week without hearing some scare story about global warming, that if we don't stop it in the next few years, the Earth is going to boil up and blow away, even though that there's been times in history where it's been much warmer than it is today, and of course, obviously, times in history where it's been much colder. None of these things, really by themselves, really are caused necessarily by human activity. It's a natural cycle. We can destroy the environment. We can destroy ecosystems. But now we have the incentive to maintain ecosystems, to manage ecosystems, but that's not good enough. We can actually manage ecosystems better than nature can herself. We can make ecosystems healthier, but that's not an alternative. Their alternative is that you have no use. That's the only solution that they have for protecting the environment. Is you cannot use it. You cannot use it. You must protect it. You must put it in the form of wilderness, whatever the case might be. Well, nonetheless, we cannot use it. Humans are the cause of the problem.
We have many people in our university systems right now, PhDs and so forth, that really believe that we must reduce our human population by 70, 80, even 90% in order to protect Mother Earth. Many of these people actually believe that there should be wholesale slaughter of human beings in one form or another, either through disease or actual government programs of some sort or another. The actual Wildlands Project itself that I fought back in the 1990s calls for the reduction in human population of 80% in the next 50 years. They don't say how to get there, although they do make it very clear that they would probably do it through agricultural means. They really truly believe that if fertilizers and so forth cause ecological destruction, because they believe that, then we must reduce the use of fertilizers, and it's fertilizers and genetic improvement and so forth that have caused the green revolution that fed the world from the 1960s on. If we eliminate that, we'll only have food production enough for about a third of the global population that we have today. That would eliminate the population within one generation.
Back in 1965, the Department of Health and Education and Welfare, HEW, sponsored a study to define how they're going to get from where they were then in 1965 to where we are now in the 21st century. They came out with a report in 1969 called the Behavioral Science Teacher Education Program, that's now fully integrated within our educational program. And this is what they said, and I want to have you hang on to your hats because you will not believe what they planned to do back in 1965-69 and what is happening actually today. He said calculations of the future and how to modify it are no longer considered to be an obscure academic pursuit. Long-range planning and implementation of plans will be made by a technological scientific elite. This will strain the democratic fabric to the ripping point. The Protestant ethic will atrophy as more and more enjoyed a varied, leisured, and guaranteed sustenance. Work as a means to, and an end of living will diminish. Most people will tend to be hedonistic and a dominant elite will provide the bread and circuses to keep social dissension and disruption at a minimum. A small elite will carry society's burdens. The resulting impersonal manipulation of most people's lifestyles will be softened by provision for pleasure-seeking and guaranteed physical necessities. The controlling elite will engage in power plays largely without the involvement of most of the people. And that is so true today. Most people have no idea what's going on in the international arena, have none. Almost all of this is being done in secrecy. Going on with this report, the society will be a leisurely one. People will study, play, and travel. Some will be in various stages of the drug-induced experiences. Each individual will receive at birth a multi-purpose identification which will have, amongst other things, extensive communications and control uses. Each individual will be saturated with ideas of information. Each will be self-selected. Other kinds will be imposed overtly by those who assume the responsibility for the other's actions. Relatively few individuals will be able to maintain control over their opinions. Most will be pawns of competing opinion molders. It's amazing how back in the 1960s they began the process of getting us to where we are right now. If you look at society today, almost every one of the characteristics that I read have come true. We are living in a planned society. We are living focused on leisure and recreation. We live in a drug-induced society. All of the things that they talked about in the 1960s have become a reality by the 21st century. This is the level of extent of control that they have. Most people's opinions are not done through education and through knowledge. They're done by molding your ideas. And that's why it's very hard for the average person to understand the fact that we're moving into a global society that is totally controlled by puppeteers, the global elite. And moving towards their ultimate objective of having world government, they have created various crises along the way over the last 100 years. World War I, as we've talked about, was contrived. World War II was contrived. We got the United Nations as a result of World War II, which was one of their big goals. Even though they denied the fact that they ever intended to have the United Nations as a world government, some of their more esoteric documents show very clearly that that's what they intended right from the start. And we're starting to see that now with the Commission on Global Governance. All the international treaties that we're looking at, especially the environmental treaties, basically are like these strands over Gulliver and Gulliver's Travels. One strand does not necessarily trap us, but when you have hundreds of these international treaties and all of these regulations, when you have the North American Union where you give up your basic sovereignty to a group of international bureaucrats, all of these things are strands that literally tie us down to the point that we no longer have freedom to cause development. We no longer have economic freedom. We no longer have a free market enterprise. We no longer have the ability to profit from innovation. And that will ultimately destroy us. Now that we no longer have war to maintain stability within the population, maintain control, which is kings and queens and bureaucrats and tyrants and so forth through history have used war, we have to have an alternative form of terror in order to maintain the stability of people and the allegiance of people behind their government. That is now taking the form of terrorism. It's a perfect recipe. Back in 1967, there was a report called the Iron Martin Report that was released, calling for environmental holocaust and so forth to accomplish the same thing. That worked to a point, but did not take them where they fully wanted to go. And they now have this mechanism of always the constant fear of terrorist attack to keep us off our feet, to keep us willing to give up our freedoms in order to gain peace and security. Carroll Quigley, in his book Tragedy and Hope, basically said they were willing to work with communists, they're willing to work with fascists, they're willing to work with any of these isms or whatever, because those groups control their population and they want to control the population. So they're more than willing to work with those groups. They say they're capitalists, but understand their form of capitalism is nothing more than controlled economies. It's not true free markets. It's not even true capitalism. It's capitalism only to a certain percentage of the population that are part of the global elite or part of the upper crust. In many ways, it's either crony capitalism or a monopoly, because those are the people, those people that rise to the top, and there are not going to be very many of them, that benefit from this fascist form of government.